The revolutionary movement of Burkina Faso belongs to the Confederation of the People of the Sahel people. It is an organization that bears a clear Pan-African vision that is determined to build an Africa that is sovereign, united, and powerful. We assert that Africa is one and indivisible. We belong to the same descendants. We are united by the same memory, the same blood that flows in our veins. The sovereignty that we're fighting for is political, economic, monetary, and cultural and security sovereignty. It is not just a slogan. It is the bedrock, the indispensable bedrock of an Africa that is free and independent. The Confederation of the People of the Sahel state falls under the spirit of an integrated, strong, and mighty Africa that will lead to the creation of the United States of Africa, which is the dream of the fathers of pan-Africanism. In that regard, decolonization requires that we restore our values, our languages, our educative system to build a strong African thought, a strong African mind that is freed, and also preserve our culture. Pan-Africanism is an ideology, a political vision that asserts that the people of Africa and of the diaspora, Afro-descendants also, are but one community united by a common history, a shared identity, and a collective destiny that cannot be divided. They defend the valorization of our cultures and liberation from every form of intrusion and exploitation. It is a fight, but also a hope, the hope of an Africa that is in charge of our own fate. Today, Pan-Africanists have to face big challenges: economic sovereignty, monetary sovereignty, scientific and technical cooperation, the establishment of African institutions that are strong and credible, that can take decisions at the gathering of the United Nations. The stake is very high. Make Africa stand tall in the concert of nations. A true Pan-Africanist is a convinced patriot, a protector of national sovereignty, and a player of the African Union, African unity. A defender of ancestral values, and a determined builder, a gatekeeper of the continent. To be a Pan-Africanist does not mean just talk about Africa. It's about serving Africa, protecting Africa, and defending Africa. The world is changing. A new multipolar order is taking place, and Africa should not remain a spectator, but Africa must be fully part of this transformation. That requires a regional integration of regional currencies, the reform of multilateral institutions, the mobilization of our internal resources, the end of artificial borders, and a strategic political unity that is affirmed. We walk in continuation of what was started by the great Pan-African leaders. I name Kwame Nkrumah, Thomas Sankara, Nelson Mandela, Sekou Toure, Amilcar Cabral, Marcus Garvey, Jomo Kenyatta, Bartolomé Buganda, Malcolm X, Maria Makeba, Felix Mouye, Ben Baraka, Julius Nyerere, Nnamdi Azikiwe, Patrice Lumumba, Kwame Nkrumah, Modibo Keita, and many more. They left behind them a heritage of unity and dignity. Unity, dignity, and a fight for our sovereignty. We therefore have the duty to carry on with this fight, this noble and heroic fight. Africa belongs to the people of Africa. Africa to Africans. I had the honor in August last year to be in August this year to be in Venezuela in America, and I want to salute the Latin American peoples who taught me. When I say they taught me, the daughter of Che Guevara, Alida Guevara, taught me that they have African blood within Latin America. They have African blood. So we must acknowledge as Africans that we are not fighting alone. On other continents, the fight for Pan-Africanism is going on. That is why, given that Africa belongs to Africans, and as long as these people will remain united, nobody will stop our walk to liberty and power. Long live Africa, that is dignified. Long live the United States of Africa. Long live Cameroon President Ibrahim Traoré, Assimi Goïta, Abdourahmane Chani, Faure Gnassingbé, and all the presidents that are fighting for the African cause, whose name we have not mentioned here. People, patriotic people, patriotic and revolutionary people of Africa, united and joined together, we will win. Fatherland or death, we will overcome.
Distinguished delegates, respected elders, visionary leaders, brothers and sisters from every corner of our great continent and the diaspora as well. I greet you in the great spirit of Pan-African unity, as well as with humility and gratitude for the honor of addressing you at this landmark 9th Pan-African Congress here in the historic city of Lomé, Togo, West Africa. To stand before thinkers, policymakers, cultural custodians, innovators, activists, and fellow Pan-Africanists who collectively embody the hopes of over 1.4 billion Africans is to stand before the continent's heartbeats. Today, I speak to you on a theme that sits at the center of Africa's future: strategic diplomacy and communication, positioning Africa as a leading actor in its own narrative. As we gather here, we are not simply attending a conference. We are participating in the continuation of a legacy that began many decades ago. When African thinkers from W.E.B. Du Bois to Kwame Nkrumah to Marcus Garvey and others declared that Africa must speak, act, and engage with the world on its own terms. Yet, even today, Africa's story is too often told by others, most times filtered, edited, simplified, distorted through lenses that do not carry realities, aspirations, and complexities that adequately define us as Africans. This is why the conversation for strategic diplomacy and communication cannot be delayed another day. Africa must take full authorship of its narrative. To position Africa as a leading actor in our own story, we must first acknowledge that narrative is power, content is king. Nations rise, industries grow, global partnerships flourish, and historical reputations are shaped through the stories societies tell about themselves and the stories others accept as truth. Africa has suffered from centuries-old stories that were not altered by Africans, stories that painted Africa as helpless instead of resourceful, as peripheral instead of central, as a continent to be spoken for rather than a continent to be listened to and worked with. When we look at the world, every powerful nation and region invests deeply in shaping its global image. The United States does it through its entertainment industry, public diplomacy, and digital presence, and ideological messaging. The European Union frames its image around heritage, democracy, and global norms. China does it through Confucius Institutes, the Belt and Road Narrative, and strategic media. If we want the world to listen, we as Africans must create a platform that amplifies our voices. Many African government agencies and continental bodies struggle with consistent, timely, and efficient communication. African institutions must build communication departments equipped with modern digital skills, crisis control tools, data analysis, and most importantly, storytelling techniques. This is because Africa's story today is being shaped on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, WhatsApp, X, or Twitter, just as much as it is being shaped in diplomatic halls and institutions. Digital diplomacy must become central to the African statement. African leaders and institutions must engage online, counter misinformation, highlight achievements, and participate in global conversations in real time. With over 500 million Africans online, we must create digital ecosystems where African voices dominate conversations about African institutions and issues. This is where Africa must engage not as a 54 separate voices, but as one diverse yet unified force with a clear pan-Africanist vision and identity. We must rise above fragmented communication efforts and build coordinated narrative systems that reflect the Africa we know, not the Africa the world has conditioned people to imagine. Currently, Africa's creative industry, from Afrobeats to film, fashion, and digital arts, are already influencing global culture. The continent has a diplomatic potential, a huge cultural wealth, and intellectual brilliance that the world cannot afford to ignore. Afrobeats alone has done more for Africa's global image in the last decade, enough to compete with many formal diplomatic institutions. Every African artist should be considered an ambassador. Every vessel of identity must be used to its fullest ability as far as African entertainers, creators, and content makers are concerned, because they are ambassadors. Africa must invest in cultural exports, film funding, creative hub, archival preservation, museum repatriation, and global partnerships. However, a major hindrance to this is that a significant portion of Africa's global perception is influenced by economic positioning. To change the narrative, we must change the economic partnerships that Africa keeps and connects with. African diplomacy must negotiate fairer trade terms, protect intellectual property, promote investment in African industries, create continental supply chains, and the most important piece in all this to me is to build intra-African trade. What many don't realize is the African Continental Free Trade Area is a huge communication tool as much as it is an economic tool. It tells the world that Africa is ready to do business with itself and with others on equal footing and terms. Yet, interconnectedly, Africa's narrative cannot rise where governance failures persist. We must acknowledge that communication alone cannot solve underlying issues. Strategic diplomacy is effective only when backed by ethical leadership, transparent institutions, and policies that uplift citizens. One of such policies can be the one that improves more on the education systems. A narrative is only as strong as the knowledge base supporting it. Africa needs refreshed curricula that reflect African stories, philosophies, innovations, and intellectual traditions instead. To say it frankly as it is, a large part of our curricula is still very colonial, very anti-African. Our schools know more about Western histories and cultures than our own stories. Children grow up admiring Western characters, even Asian characters they see on TV, and they want to be like them. Why not tell more of the African story through the power of the media? If we must be proud of our identities, we must first understand what those identities mean in the first place. Our schools, universities, think tanks, and research institutions must become engines for narrative transformation. With Africa being the youngest continent, our youths are the producers, consumers, and amplifiers of modern stories. Their creative activism, their digital influence and fluency, and cultural innovation must be nurtured and integrated into national and continental strategies. Then, there's also the African diaspora, estimated at over 170 million people. The diaspora is our extended nation, or as we choose to call it, the SID region. There are scientists, entrepreneurs, media leaders, educators, activists, and policymakers in the diaspora that are influencing the global systems. Yet, Africa has historically under-engaged this powerful diaspora community. Strategic communication requires that we build structured diaspora networks, strengthen dual citizenship frameworks, encourage diaspora investment, create channels for cultural reconnection, and for heaven's sake, remove the visas. The diaspora must be part of the narrative, not an audience to it. More than we can imagine, the diaspora is our window to the world. In many cases, the outside world interacts with the diaspora before the continent itself. And when this community is equipped with the right information and integration, it becomes an ambassador for the continent of Africa. It will promote the continent's cultures and stories abroad and source for opportunities that can benefit the continent. Everything I have mentioned above converges into the simple yet transformative act of telling African stories creatively, proudly, and consistently. From Nollywood to the Timbuktu manuscripts, from Maasai folklore to contemporary poetry, our stories contain power, memory, identity, and vision. To control our narrative, we must tell our stories not once, not occasionally, but repetitively, all the time, everywhere. Africa must invest in continental media networks, international broadcasting, film studios, publishing houses, digital platforms, and independent journalism. Africans should tell African stories in global languages and through global channels. When we rely solely on external media, we give others the pen to write our own stories. Let us imagine an Africa where diplomats speak confidently from a position of unity. An Africa where global media houses regularly source African perspectives. An Africa where our films, books, music, innovation, and festivals define global culture. An Africa where every young person feels represented, empowered, and connected. An Africa whose global image is reflected and shown in its true potential and not outdated stereotypes. Strategic diplomacy and communication are not abstract concepts. They are political and practical tools that shape how Africa negotiates, collaborates, competes, and leads as we move forward. We must develop continental communication strategies that unite private sector, civil society, media, academia, and the diaspora. We must craft narrative rooted in dignity, excellence, truth, and honesty. When our ancestors fought for liberation, they fought not only for land and freedom, but also for the right to define themselves. That fight continues today, but it is a battleground that has shifted from the fields and borders to airwaves, screens, stories, algorithms, institutions, and global discourse. Our generation's responsibility is to win this new front of the struggle peacefully, strategically, creatively, and consistently. We must therefore leave this Congress with a renewed commitment to shaping the Africa we see, not the Africa others want us to see. We must speak as architects of our destiny, not as footnotes to someone else's text. We must present Africa as leading actor whose voice carries purpose, whose image commands respect, and whose vision inspires an entire global identity. Let the story of Africa no longer be narrated about us, but narrated by us. Let the world no longer define Africa by moments of crisis, but by the full richness of our civilization, innovation, culture, and humanity. Let us rise today as custodians of Africa, as champions of African unity, as ambassadors of African possibility, and authors of Africa's future. I would like to pay respect to the spirits of Kwame Nkrumah Osajifo, Patrice Lumumba, and all other Pan-Africanists who time will not permit me to mention. I would like to acknowledge the spirit of our ancestors, those that are here with us within these walls, those whose names were erased from history, those whose names were not even added. And may this Congress mark the beginning of a renewed era of Pan-Africanism as well as a newer African narrative sovereignty. May strategic diplomacy become the backbone of our global engagement. I thank you all, and may Africa rise in dignity. Thank you.